Very good evening to you. Welcome along Sheffield Live on a Thursday night. Talking Sheffield means talking sport. Only the one guest tonight, but when it's a man whose career in football spans something like approaching 35 years, most of that time with the two Sheffield clubs, and is, by my reckoning, by some distance, the longest serving figure currently in Sheffield football. You don't need anybody else other than Andy Daykin. Good evening, Andy.
Evening, Alan.
Welcome along. I don't know whether I'm making you feel old or you're making me feel old, but whichever it is, we go back quite a long way.
We do indeed. I can't quite remember when you were at Hallam.
Radio Hallam was
As a sports reporter. That's when I probably first met you.
Yeah, that was in the 1980s, early 1980s, sports editor. But we're here to talk about you because you are actually, I've worked your age out, and you're actually a little bit older than me. So I'm really pleased to have somebody who's older than me in the studio. But for those who don't know, Andy was for many years a commercial director. Is that the right title? Commercial manager at Sheffield United, and he's one of those. Well, actually, there were quite a lot of people who've actually done this, either playing or certainly the great Derek Dooley did as well. He has served both clubs because currently, since 2011, am I right, you've been working on the commercial scene at Sheffield Wednesday.
I have indeed, yes.
So that makes you, well, it doesn't make you unique, but it makes you a figure of intrigue, I would imagine, to many of the sporting populace of this city. Do you find that?
Yes, a little bit. Obviously, I've worked at a few clubs and done 2 stints at Sheffield United. So, and as you say, it spans a long period of time. And I do get asked the question many times, which is your club or who do you support? I grew up in a family where there was only me that liked football. So I chose to go to both clubs every Saturday. So, you know, one week United will be at home, I'd go there, the next week to Hillsborough. So I didn't really have a firm support as a young man, but I did start watching Sheffield United more when Tony Curry came on the scene. Yeah,
there's an obvious attraction there.
Great player.
Yeah. So you really are absolutely banging it, because you saved me asking the question, because you asked yourself the question, who did you support? And I do sympathise with it, because journalists in this city, we get a lot of it as well.
Sure.
And no matter how often you say, well, I support both of them, I like both, people don't believe you, do they? They do not believe you.
No, they don't. Obviously, I had a very long time at Sheffield United, and so it's understandable that people will say, well, you're a Blade. My kids grew up being Blades, and they bought me pigs, in fact, when I went across to Sheffield Wednesday. So they bought me pigs, pink pigs. So I've been through everything in that respect. But
so you have more stick at home than you did from the wider populace.
Absolutely. But you know, when I went to Hull City, which was back in 1998, and I spent 3 years at Hull, I realised that you're watching the team every week, you start supporting them. And I was forgetting what the results were at Bramall Lane, or not even really worrying about them. Yeah. So yeah, I became a Hull City fan, and then I went to Barnsley for a short time. I was cheering Barnsley on against Sheffield United in a league game there, and which they actually won. Yeah. Neil Shipley scored, I think. Right. And then ended up, after a short period at Barnsley, going back to Bramall Lane, and then I was back being a Sheffield United fan. You know, you do support the team that you're working for. There's no question about it, and I'm sure it's the same for managers and players when they're playing for different teams. But there is a lot of hysteria that goes around whenever Sheffield Wednesday sign a player who's previously played at United, and vice versa, isn't there? Sure. Do you understand any of that, or what, do you find it hard to? I do, and I've got involved with the banter myself over the years, but you know, there's been some good players that have swapped clubs and done very well. Probably more, I think, going from in latter years, going from Sheffield Wednesday to Bramall Lane and vice versa. Bromby and Geary and Quinn. Yeah. So there's probably been more going in that direction, but they've turned to be very good players. You know, so. I mean, the banter's great and everybody enjoys it, but of course. Unless it borders on, you know, it can go a little bit further than that sometimes, which is a bit hard to fathom, can't it? It can, and that's perhaps the best example of that was when Danny Wilson was appointed by Sheffield United as a
a good football manager, and people couldn't somehow see beyond the fact that actually he was born in Lancashire, played for Bury, I think supported Wigan.
Yeah.
They couldn't see that. They just saw him as a Wednesday player and a Wednesday manager.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I remember Danny, of course, when he was playing at Sheffield Wednesday, and I think in those days it was probably a little bit. It was probably more friendly between the two teams because all players in those days they lived in the city. It's not quite the case now, but we'd all end up in the same nightclub or whatever it would be after a Tuesday night game, and you got to know both sides very, very well.
So basically, to distill your response on that big question, you support whoever you're working for. So at the moment, you're an owl.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you're working with Sheffield Wednesday. We'll come back to your background because that's interesting that your parents weren't football supporters. Normally it's handed down, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, my dad was a football fanatic.
Yeah, there was nobody in the family at all that followed football in any way, shape or form. So why I got a love for it at such a young age, I've no idea. But I was going from 7 or 8 years old.
Do you think more people did what you did in that era of go to Hillsborough one week and Bramall Lane the next?
I do believe that. It was very much easier to go to a football match. You turned up and
cheaper?
It was cheaper. You could turn up on the turnstiles and just pay. You pick your matches maybe, but occasionally there was a very big game, but not too many. I mean, I remember, gosh, the '71 team of Sheffield United when they played Cardiff and Hull at the end of that season, and those were massive, massive gates, but you still just turned up on the turnstiles.
It's incredible to think about that. Because I remember going to that Cardiff game, 41,000 plus, I think, was the crowd. And I was somewhere on the cricket side, couldn't get anywhere near the pitch because, and as you say, they just let people in.
No.
Yeah, just spilled in.
I remember when I started at Bramall Lane, the capacity then was 49,000, and that was 82.
Hard to believe now, isn't it?
And it's, 31 and a bit at Bramall Lane now.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of your work. Let's go right up to date before we go back. You're at Wednesday. You're in the commercial departments at Wednesday, and of course, with the promotion bid, you must have been sitting there thinking, which way is this going to go? Because it was going to alter dramatically the terms of the job, wasn't it? Whether they got in the Premier League or not.
It certainly has a massive effect, but I've done that transition from Championship to Premier League before, and you're well catered for by the Premier League officials, and they do guide you and help you, and clearly the money changes. Everything goes up in price, but the job doesn't change really.
They're so different, the two clubs, in composition at the moment, aren't they? I mean, you've worked for both of them. They're chalk and cheese in terms of the administration and the way it works, aren't they? I mean, Wednesday, you've got an owner who he's paid the money, so he's going to take the choices, and very few others involved in the decision making, I'd have said. Whereas at United, is it 10 directors?
Well, I don't know the makeup of the board at Sheffield United now. Obviously, you've got a dual chairmanship situation there with Kevin McCabe and the Prince, and there are probably more senior officials that help in making decisions at Bramall Lane than at Hillsborough. The current chairman at Sheffield Wednesday is very, very hands-on. I think Kevin at Bramall Lane would be more hands-on if he was local. I think he would be.
He's becoming more hands-on lately, without doubt.
Yeah.
And the other partner, or joint chairman, is receding. I would say, you might find it difficult to comment, but he seems to be receding into the background.
Possibly so. I mean, I'm not au fait with the politics at Bramall Lane now, but Kevin, it's a passion for him. He is a great chairman, I believe. His heart is in Sheffield United. He was born on Shoreham Street or just off Shoreham Street. So, quite where the Prince fits into it, I've no idea. Emotionally, anyway. With Kevin, I understand it.
Yeah. He gets a lot of criticism, as anybody who's been chairman of a football club for a long period is going to do. By his own admission, actually, and this is to his credit, he admits that he's got some big calls wrong. Hard not to disagree, actually, looking in from
Yeah,
outside.
you can relate to the Danny Wilson sacking.
Yeah.
Going into the playoffs, it seemed a bit strange. I mean, he'd not had a bad year, and that did seem strange. But these things happen in football. We see it all the time, don't we? So.
We certainly do. It's a mad industry. I mean, what's it like to work within it? Because I suppose you're at the sharp end as well. The fact that you've survived so long and done this job so long has got to be as big a tribute as anybody could have, couldn't it? To be involved with fundraising and commercial ventures as you have.
Well, it's nice to have the longevity in the industry, but to me, it's still a people game. I think, especially on the commercial side, it's about relationships and partnerships and growing those over a long period of time. And I've been very lucky that I've got to know an awful lot of people in the city and made friends with I'd like to think the vast proportion of them.
Well, the great thing is that you've crossed that divide. And that supporters, as far as I'm aware, I mean, on Twitter, for instance, I've been inundated with goodwill messages, people asking to say hello to you. I haven't had a single spiteful response whatsoever. Nobody calling you a pig like your kids do, or whatever. Ranging from Nick Matthew, the 3-time world squash champion, asked to say hello to you, to Steve Thompson, for instance, former Blades manager at one time.
Yes, he was indeed.
People. So you're known virtually everywhere in this city, it would seem to me, and nobody kind of pins you down on that issue. Are you a Blade or an Owl?
No, I think that's end of really with that subject. I mean, I love the city as well. That's a big thing. I would dearly love to see both clubs playing in the Premier League. We had it for a very, very short time in the early 90s, but other than that, both clubs have been pretty woeful for a considerable period of time now.
It changed at Hillsborough when Milan Mandaric came in and rescued things. I know that you had a lot of time for him. He was the one that actually brought you in, wasn't he? There. And he must take some quiet satisfaction at the way things are going.
I'm sure he does, because he's a real football man. I can remember I decided to set up a consultancy business, which I still have, and I just got that going when I get a call from Paul Aldridge, it was, the vice chairman, saying would I come and meet with Mr. Mandaric, and I said, don't see why not, and I went in fear and trepidation, having sort of looked at his past and thought, well, he's a bit of a hire him and fire him type chairman, and I was a bit scared of him, but he's probably one of the nicest people that I've ever met in football.
Really? That's a big statement.
He's such a football person. He's considered a wealthy man, and he did stabilise financially Sheffield Wednesday. Absolutely no question about that. And anybody had the chance to walk in and snatch it from the jaws of administration, but he did it. And he was great to work for. If things weren't going well, he would say, get back up. It's not the man that gets knocked down that loses, it's the man that doesn't get back up. And he was good to work for.
A genial, very approachable man, but a man with a temper.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And especially in football terms.
Yeah.
Very, very true. But he did really, really care about it, and he did understand football. He set up San Jose Earthquakes way back in the 70s, I believe, and he was a great footballer himself. He's worked with George Best, he's worked with everybody, and I really enjoyed his company. He was a proper gentleman, and he carried the aura of being a chairman. When you walked into the boardroom, you didn't have to ask who's the chairman. You just knew. He fabulous guy.
Very good PR man who established a good rapport with the supporters, which I think exists really to this day. I mean, he's kept very quiet. He's in Slovenia at the moment, I think.
Yeah, his team just won the league. He's got a Slovenian team, and they've just won the league, so he won't let go of football.
No, good on him, and he's in sort of mid to late 70s now.
Yeah.
But then you get so many characters in football, and perhaps you couldn't get two more opposite people than Milan Mandaric and Daykin Chansiri in some ways. I mean, how would you compare those two?
Well, they're both direct owners of the club, so that side is similar. I think that obviously Milan Mandaric had a longer period in time in English football, working in English football, before he came to Sheffield Wednesday. So he'd had his spell at Portsmouth, he'd had his spell at Leicester, and so he was probably more accustomed to the ways that we worked as a country, or not the city so much, but the British way of life and the way that we run business, which I think has perhaps been more of a challenge for Mr. Chansiri, who's come from a completely different culture, and so he tries to do everything. I mean, he really does manage everything hands-on. There's no decision made that doesn't go through Mr. Chansiri.
Like ordering some paper for a printer, and even to levels like that? Or?
Well, perhaps not quite as low as that, but but certainly any considerable orders in size, if we say £1,000 over, he would expect, excuse me, it to go through him. That
surprised me a bit, because I know it's the case, from talking to people down there, but I think the impression was when he took over that he would have people run it for him. He does have people around it, but as you say, he takes close interest in absolutely everything.
He does have advisors that are tight advisors, but essentially any meaningful decision goes through the chairman. End of, really.
So there's no committee delay. I mean, I know he did set up that committee and he disbanded it, which shows actually he learns quite quickly.
Yeah, I think that was. I think he still believes that approach to buying and selling players is perhaps the correct approach, but he recognised that in this case it hadn't worked and disbanded it basically. So
you don't see him returning to it?
Not in the short term. I wouldn't think so. No.
So essentially, Carlos Carvalho, the head coach, effectively manager really, and the owner, just between them are making the key calls. Yeah,
I mean, it's become a trendy term, hasn't it? The head coach rather than the manager, but
there's no difference, is there, in operation?
No, I mean, you know from the press yourself, who are you going to interview? You're going to interview the head coach, aren't you? So it's the same job, whatever you call it.
It's semantics, really.
Yeah.
And the assumption is, and certainly from the rare utterances, because he doesn't speak in public very often, from Mr. Chansiri, is that he's going to spend another load of cash this summer.
Well, that remains to be seen, doesn't it? Yeah, I'm sure. He is absolutely determined that Sheffield Wednesday will get promoted next season. He is 100% determined. Now, what that takes in terms of cash and new players, not for me to say, but he will want to achieve it next year.
Financial fair play is an awkward animal, and you'll understand it a little bit better than I do, and maybe viewers do. How difficult is that to negotiate around?
I actually try and avoid anything financial like the plague, but
which is rare in your job.
But it is difficult. You've seen Nottingham Forest go through a situation where they've had an embargo on buying players simply by overspending in the first place. And not meeting the financial fair play requirements, and so that obviously is a concern. And if Mr. Chansiri is going to spend considerable numbers of millions, for instance, then yes, it could be something quite critical to Sheffield Wednesday.
There are always creative ways around these problems, and I'm sure many a club exercises that route, but I don't think most of us on the periphery can quite get our heads around it. But it's quite clear that he's very ambitious for next season, and the fact that there doesn't appear to be any activity at the moment in the transfer market is misleading. I'm sure plenty's going on.
Oh, there's a long way to go. Yeah, we've got the Euros starting tomorrow, haven't we? And then I'm sure there'll be a flurry of purchases come the end of that tournament.
Okay, there's a long way to go in this programme as well. We've only reached half-time, as it were. I think the aggregate score's about level. And Andy's staying with us. So in around about 5 minutes, just time for a quick break, cup of tea, whatever. We will rejoin Andy Daykin. I'm sure you'll be back. Look forward to that. See you then.